But immediately my mind gets going again and wants to put structures on it. And so I'm asking questions that are a little bit about structures. And it's a two-part question, really. One is about the sort of stages of beingness, like a great teacher who's a realized being, but doesn't seem to perform miracles and somehow isn't quite there, and yet they are. And perhaps a teacher like your own guru who is truly everywhere and truly one. I am one with the Father. Is there a difference? Is there a distinction of beingness at all stages, or is it either full enlightenment or not? That's the first part. And then the second part is in particular coming from the Christian tradition, although I'm sure it's the same in others, about how we see or explain Jesus. Would we see him as Jesus, the Christed one, the Christed in fully enlightened being, or would we see him as an incarnation, and is there a difference anyway? And then the third part of my busy mind question.
Yes, go ahead.
Being with one's guru on an inner plane, as you have described, and as one may know, is that a stage on the path to beingness, or is it, I mean, how does it fit in, really?
I think you've pointed out at the beginning the predicament very well about institutions, that it's very hard for institutions to institutionalize beingness. I mean, when you take just that Ram Tirth quote, I am without form, without limit, beyond space, beyond time, I am in everything, everything is in me. It's really hard to set up a church around that one, you know. And as I think I did that one earlier in the week about, God and Satan walking down the street, and they see a shiny object, and God picks it up, and he says, truth. And Satan says, here, give it to me, I'll organize it. And it feels to me that in the history of religions, what you usually have is that at the root of it is the mystic vision. Somebody has the direct experience of beingness, of merging, of being one with it all. And then they are a very powerful light or force for faith in that. But then what's called the priest class has not had the direct experience. And all they have is the report of the direct experience. And that report of the direct experience is what they use. That's what becomes the rock for the church, is the report, not the direct experience itself. And even though there is an attempt through, say, the Eucharist, for example, to keep the direct experience, it is a direct experience that is not the direct experience that has, because direct experience is beyond form, so it has chaos in it as well as cosmos. And no institution can really support that. I mean, in a way, for example, when I got thrown out of Harvard, that was the same issue. It was a church that was based on the rational mind, if you will. And what the drugs did was confront us with direct experience that couldn't be institutionalized within that church framework. And I think they were right to throw us out. I mean, I would have thrown us out if I had to preserve the institution. You can hear that issue. So, and the institution is justified on the basis of carrying the memory of that direct experience and taking the wisdom from it and institutionalizing it in such a way to provide structures so that people won't create too much bad karma for themselves in a lifetime in which they're probably not going to awaken to have the direct experience. It is based on the assumption that nobody's having the direct experience. That interesting. There are very few. I mean, you get to the Quakers, which is the still small voice within, which goes back in. And now in the kind of religious sects where people are now being encouraged to have direct experiences. But you will watch how tricky those institutions are to keep them together, because suddenly there are a dozen messiahs, and And then they get into a power struggle as to whose vision is the clearest, because everybody ends up, when they transcend structure, of going to one astral plane or another. And then whatever seeds of desire are left or attachment in them, they take with them out into these planes, and then take the formless and interpret it in terms of who they are and what they need, and then bring it back in. So, and if people aren't done with power when they have these experiences, they bring them back in terms of power dynamics. Coming to the questions about partly enlightened or fully enlightened beings. From our point of view, we wouldn't know one unless we were one. It takes one to know one, because you can feel that to the extent that you're holding, you only see the projections of your own mind outward. So you don't really know what's out there at all. So your yearning to see an enlightened being may make, like I yearn to see Maharaji as an enlightened being. I have no idea who he is. There are people who think he is a complete hung-up phony that just conned me, right? And that I'm just outselling my lack of faith, right? And I'm perfectly willing to accept that possibility, that I'm psychotic and I'm just taking all of you on this wonderful trip. And you ask for it and you're getting it, and then you'll have to throw it off one lifetime or another later on. I mean, I don't promise anything. I don't guarantee. I don't know who he is. You know, I mean, he said things to me that absolutely were off the wall. And what I did was I treated them as, well, I don't understand, instead of, he's a nut, you know, because I wanted to hold on to a certain view because I needed that view. And because my relation with him is such that I just trust all of that process at this point. But I can see that that is a certain stance of mind. I mean, me as a scientist sees that that's a certain stance of mind, that in a way it is a form of psychosis. So one doesn't know who another being is. And so I think what it comes down to is that you take from each being what it is that intuitively you can use on your journey. And that becomes the more interesting question. Otherwise, you become what's called a connoisseur of clay feet. You're so afraid of being taken or had by an impure teacher that what you're constantly doing is looking for all the limits of each teacher. And I feel that each teacher's limits are their problem. If he isn't a fully realized being, that is his karma. My karma is determined by the purity of my own heart. And if I see him as pure, I get what I can get from him. And I use it for my own exit, so to speak. Okay. So they talk about the difference between Satgurus and Upagurus in India. And a Satguru is a being who is the way, and an Upaguru is one who points the way. Teachers are Upagurus. Children are Upagurus. Tripping on a stone is an Upaguru. Playing tennis is a Upaguru. I mean, this is all Upaguru-ness. Okay. And really, it comes back to the somebodyness, or the attachment to control, that a fully enlightened being, there's nobody wanting control. There may be the appearance of control, but that is an appearance. But you wouldn't know that if you're outside of it. It seems real and solid. I remember seeing Maharaji get extremely angry at somebody. And he had just said to me, saints never get angry. And he said, I couldn't get angry at you even in a dream. And there he was screaming at somebody. And I got furious. I got furious because I felt like he betrayed me. And he got very angry at this person. And then he went inside the room, which I didn't see because I was in a building across the courtyard watching all this out the window. And he said to Dada, his devotee who was there, he said, he turned to him very matter-of-factly and he said, "Did Ram Dass see me get angry?" And I was hiding behind a window. I mean, he didn't see me. He never looked up or anything. And Dada says, "No, Maharaj, he wasn't there. You know." He says, "Yes, he did." He said, "Tell him all his questions should be answered. He should have no questions." So Dada came up to me and he said, "Did you see Maharaji get angry?" I said, "Yes, I did." And I want an explanation. And he said, "Maharaji says you should have no questions. Everything will be answered." I said, "Well, I hope so." Right? So all day long, I waited for him to give me an explanation. And as we were leaving that day, we were all gathered around him, and there was a couple who had had a fight the night before. And he said to them, he quoted the Kabir quote that Jai has quoted. He says, "Do what you do with another person, but never put them out of your heart." And he went like that to me. And that's all. And then he threw us out. That was the only explanation. And now I can interpret that to preserve my understanding of him as an enlightened being, that he loved this man so much that the anger was dharmic anger out of his love for him that he was using as a functional thing, and he himself was not angry. Because he walked back into the room and he said very matter-of-factly, "Did he see me get angry?" I mean, he obviously wasn't angry at that moment, as Dada reports. Do you hear what I'm trying to say? Or I can say he got angry and he was covering, depending on how I want to interpret him. Right? I just thought back to another example of when he played with my control mechanism, which is the same issue, really. This time when we had been in Allahabad, and Maharaji said, these Westerners, see, I had been responsible. When I went back from India in 1968, Maharaji said, "Don't tell anybody about me." And it was hard to resist telling people I loved that I just met the person that was most important in my life. So I figured what I'll do is I won't give him his name and I won't tell where he is. I'll just talk about him. So I figured I'd slide by. I mean, I came from a family of lawyers, so. So I did this, and of course everybody was very shrewd, and they figured out where he was, and they traced my roots and all, and they found him. And pretty soon there were literally hundreds of Westerners around him, and I really realized that somehow I had been responsible for this. And so he said one day, there were 30 or 40 of us, he said, "Ram Dass," we were staying at a house nearby, and he said, "These Westerners are bothering me. Keep them away. Don't let them come until 6 o'clock. So I went back and I said to the group, "Maharaji says you're not to come till 6 o'clock. We'll all go over at 6 o'clock. Well, there were some of the older ones who'd been around for a while. They had figured out that you didn't always have to do everything Maharaji said. See, there are two theories about how to be around a guru. One is that you do everything they say. And the other is you want God so bad you just demand and insist, because they can handle themselves. And you just keep beating, and if they say go away, you say, I don't care whether you say go away, I'm staying. See, that's the other strategy. I'm always of the first type. If he says go, I go, because I'm such a good person. And then I end up hating all the people that don't go. See, so I said, Maharaji said, don't go till 6 o'clock. And what happened was a number of them went over at 4 o'clock. And then the ones that believed in me didn't go till 6. And at 4 o'clock when they got there, Maharaji fed them and loved them and talked with them. And when I came at 6 o'clock with a lot of new people who had not yet met Maharaji, but who only knew me and were believing me, he wouldn't see any of us. And then he called me in later in the evening and he said, Ram Dass, I told you not to let anybody come till 6. He says, now tomorrow I don't want anybody to come till 6. So I went back to the place we were staying. I said, now tomorrow, none of us are to go till 6. Maharaji said so. So the next day, the same ones went back at 4, and some of the others who realized that I wasn't to be depended on went at 4 too. Maharaji fed them and loved them and did all that, and I came at 6 with my reduced ranks, and he didn't see us, and I was getting really pissed off. I put it crudely, and then later in the evening, he went out into the kitchen courtyard, and he said, and we were all just told to keep singing Shri Ram Jai Ram, which we were singing like a shopping list, at that point, because Shri Ram Jai Ram, like, come on, Maharaji. And he said, have the women come out here. So all the girls and women went out, and I heard them laughing in the other room, and here were all these guys left who had never met Maharaji, who had been there for days waiting to meet him, see, and he wouldn't even see them. And then he said, send half of the men. So the ones that stayed behind were the most long-suffering ones. I mean, they were the really good ones that were just... And then he went into his room and closed the door. He wouldn't see anybody. So I'd had it. So I went to Dada and I said, Maharaji isn't being fair. I mean, I've got my guru rule book, and he isn't adhering to the rules of guru-ness. So he said, you better tell him that yourself. I said, well, I will. So I was brought into the room with Maharaji, and he looks over and he says, yeah? Like, what is it? I said, Maharaji, you're not fair. Yeah? I said, you told me not to bring people. I bring them. And I gave my long litany of grievances. I had my whole thing about how he had broken all the guru rules. And I said, and then you wouldn't see these people. And, and then I sort of waited for an explanation. And he looked at me like a monkey, And he says, he turned to Dada and he says, Ram Dass is angry. And then he reached forward and he grabbed my beard and he gave it a yank. And then he just looked at me. It's like, okay, now it's your move. Now I was faced with an interesting predicament, because my rational mind had not been satisfied. And I had the choice. If I were going to be true to my rational mind, I should get up and walk out and say, he's a fraud. He didn't play by the game rule. I can't follow somebody who's that, irresponsible. But at that moment, I imagined myself getting up and I'm just looking in his eyes, walking down the street, and then suddenly there I am out on the street and I don't have him anymore. Or I can just give up and say, you're a complete irresponsible nut, but so what? My rational mind isn't going to be satisfied because there's something else much truer here. And at that moment, I just relaxed and said, okay, I gave up. Now, it's interesting about that quality, because that's one that, for somebody that stays in their rational mind, that is a very difficult story to handle. Can you hear that? That's the exact issue about that one. And he really forced that issue on me. He gave me my choice at that moment. Okay, now coming to the issue of Christ. We are invited to embrace both the Jesus and the Christ. The Jesus story, which is the manifestation of conscious spirit into form, as a storyline which is left behind as a device to awaken faith. Because what Christ's message through the crucifixion and all of it was in part, and many of you I'm sure know it much better than I do, was who you think I am, I'm not. And what I am, you can't get to. And yet here I am in a human birth. And I'm in a human birth so I can say, I can have doubt even at the end, why have you forsaken me? As one gospel suggests. And I have the absolute assurance now the work is completed, that the other gospel suggests. I mean, I can have all that going in this being all at once, which is the tension that's created by that human and divine quality, which makes it even more of a powerful statement that is saying to us, this is who you are. When you realize this, you are not vulnerable to suffering and to death. So when it says Jesus took away our suffering, it is true that to the extent that you have faith in that story and you recognize that that story represents consciousness that took a human birth like you are thereby recognize who you are and you are freed from suffering. Because once you know that, you don't suffer. You may experience pain and death, but you don't. Once you die, you don't die. If you die, one, etc. So I think that the Son of God idea is that this is a conscious incarnation, that this is a being who doesn't have personal karma to work out. This is a being who comes with only collective karma. That the birth is out of the collective karma, not out of the individual karma. And that is similar to a Krishna who does that, and a Ram, while Buddha, for example, had personal karma. Buddha is an example of somebody who took a human birth and then worked it through and finished, which is another kind of faith one gets, that it's possible to finish in a human birth. See, that you don't get from a Christ, because he came already made, right? All right. Is that upsetting somebody, what I'm saying? Is that? Okay. That was the second, third part of your 2-part, 1-part, 9-part. And then there was one more.
The third was relating to one's guru, whoever that may be, at an inner level. Is that an important part of the path, or is it in some ways a distraction from the path?
As I said a number of times this week, that going up the mountain, there are many different paths. And the relational path of a guru, of Christ, of that quality. I mean, Maharaji continually said to people, Christ is your guru. He said, Christ is alive. He lives in your heart, and he is your guru. He said that to most Westerners. He didn't say to them to follow Ram or Krishna. He said, Christ is your guru. Now, for some people, as I said before, the emotional relationship that a human being can form with another being is one of the things which gets their consciousness focused in just through the intense love. So the intense love for Jesus as a human being. And then as you love Jesus so much, you start to meet the Christ. And then as you love the Christ so much, that which you love, you keep merging into. And when you've merged into the Christ, then there's only one of it. That would be the root of bhakti, of devotion, of dualism, right? In that sense, it's been a great asset to have the inner guru and then feel the presence and then keep merging into that presence. That would be a technique. If you're doing vipassana, where you're following your breath, then inner gurus are all just thought forms, and you got to get rid of them right away. Can you see that? Yeah. Yes. that every 40 seconds a child dies of starvation in the world unnecessarily. I mean, in the sense that there is enough food in the world, so that does not need to happen. So it's the lack of human consciousness. That there was a Holocaust in which 6 million Jews, for example, are murdered just because they're Jews. Now, at our human heart level, nothing can allow that. I mean, there's no way that we as humans can allow that. A spiritual explanation we ultimately find offensive to our human heart is really what happens. Because I remember when Emmanuel said, the beings in the Holocaust, see, when I said to you, when I read that thing this morning and I said there are no errors, and that the way in which you die is as much part of your curriculum as anything else. Now, I mean, I can take you on a great astral storyline in which 6 million people, 6 million beings, were waiting for an opportunity to come together where they would die in this way, and that their collective statement of dying would so affect human consciousness that it would end up being a major compassionate act for all beings henceforth. All right? I mean, just take that one. Now, that one is so offensive to the human heart that there could be a grander design in which that act was an acceptable act. Not the act of the atrocity, but that the whole thing had a design to it in which God wasn't in error, or which doesn't show there's no God. In other words, where there is law and there's design. My sense, what I do is I live with the mystery all the time. I'm constantly getting to the edge of my understanding. And then instead of judging at that point, I just open to the mystery and I just sit with it. And I sit with it saying, I don't understand this yet. But I will allow the possibility that there is method in it from a spiritual point of view. That's the only way I work with it. And then I do what I can as a human heart to stop it. I mean, nothing I'm saying spiritually justifies not doing anything. Right? That's partly an answer to your question about suffering this morning. There's no way you can do that. You've got to deal with the paradox of the two levels of reality at the same moment. You've got to deal with the fact that it's all perfect and it stinks. And the perfection, you see the perfection, but the perfection includes that your human heart hurts and you got to do something about it. And both of those things are true. Yes?
How can we understand the issue of soul, body, and abortion?
Abortion's a Trungpa Rinpoche, a Tibetan Lama, once said to me, you realize that when a being is aborted, it is the collaboration of all three souls that are involved, meaning the two parents and the child. Even though one person may think they did it, it actually comes out of the collective intent or need of the three souls that are involved. And since there are no errors and the way in which you leave is as much part of your curriculum as anything else, according to those rules, if you just stay with those rules, a being comes into the fetal state and that's where their work is, and then they leave the fetal state because they finish their work. So now, when you look at it from the point of view of somebody who aborts somebody else, like a mother that aborts a baby intentionally, then you have to examine the karma that accrues to the mother from that act. And then it has to do with the father, and then it has to do with why they aborted. Whether the abortion is because it's inconvenient or because of a number of things in which their clinging to their mind is what makes them do an act. It's like when you kill a mosquito or when you do anything else. There is karma depending on your intent. Karma is the result of intention. It's not the act. It's the intention of the act that is where the karma is created. So that the act of abortion could come out of a variety of intentions, which could have a variety of different karmic effects. But from the soul's point of view of the being aborted, it's just that being did whatever they had to do that round. I'm giving you now a straight spiritual, the traditional spiritual response to that from a reincarnational point of view.